System requirements. Let's jump into the system requirements. What I want to list over here, I went through the release notes and put together all the system requirements that we are recommending to you guys. And the next slides are actually showing this probably in a different way, but hopefully that's it's understandable. So we're starting with TBC. So TBC, we are saying it's the operation system should be either the Windows 10 64-bit version or Windows 8. Since version 5.21, we no longer support Windows 7, as you might know. And also putting here some of the minimum and recommended system requirements. So in yellow, we have the minimum for the CPU is the 1.8 gigahertz or better, dual core, but we are recommending quad-core 2.8 gigahertz for the CPU. On the graphic card should be supporting the OpenGL version 3.3. A minimum requirement would be 1 gigabyte virtual RAM, but we are recommending 4 gigabyte or higher. And on the random access memory, the RAM, the minimum requirement would be 4 gigabyte and recommended is 32 gigabyte or higher. On the hard disk space, of course, we are recommending the solid state drive SSD with around 100 gigabyte space, recommended also 500 gigabyte. All depends on your workflow or where's the data coming from. Of course, if you have mobile mapping data, then it's probably better go with a 500 gigabyte SSD hard drive. And here the release notes, if you want to review it, also put it together on that slide. These slides or the presentation will be available for you guys if you want. In end of the presentation, we can actually share it with you, so don't worry. How it looks like for RealWorks. On the RealWorks side, we have the operating system Windows 10 and Windows 8.1. That's all minimum and recommended system requirements. On the CPU side, 2.8 gigahertz quad-core processor, and recommended is additional courses with hyper-threading support. About threading, I will come in a few minutes what this means. On the graphic card, also supporting the OpenGL version 3.3. And the minimum requirement would be 1 gigabyte virtual RAM or higher. Recommended, of course, is 4 gigabyte virtual RAM for RealWorks. On the RAM specification, minimum would be 16 gigabyte, and recommended it's 32 gigabyte or higher. On the hard drive, again, solid state, and recommended 500 gigabyte. And the latest version for RealWorks is version 11.2.2, which has been released in March this year. Perspective is a bit different. As you might know, it's can be run on the Trimble T10 tablet. So in that case, we're having the operating system Windows 10. And as a minimum, we saying it's an Intel 6th generation Core i7 with a 2.5 gigahertz quad-core or better. The graphic card should be the Intel HD Graphics 520 or better. And for the RAM, it's 8 gigabyte or 16 as a recommendation from our side. The hard disk space, again, solid state, if available, and recommended it's 500 gigabyte. Of course, if available. For the T10, it's not the case. And the latest version for Perspective is version 1.1.1, which has been released in February this year. System parameters. Yeah, what I mean with system parameters. So on the next slide, I will explain the difference about the single and the multi-thread and why it's so important for processing huge data set. showing also the important parameters such as CPU, SSD, the RAM, and the GPU. In addition to that, how to have a good balance in speed between these parameters. So starting with a single and multi-thread, maybe not all of you know what this means. So we have here a screenshot from the PC where you can open up the performances. It's a screenshot from my PC that I'm using as Intel Core i7. So single thread in general, if you look it up on the web, means more or less that single thread process a single sequence. In other words, one command is processed at a time. For the multi-thread, it's already saying it's the ability for a program to manage to use by more than one users at a time, or even manage multiple requests by the same users without having to have multiple copies of the programming running on the PC. So it can actually solve the process in a much faster way. That's why the multi-thread is so important for the software solutions in the market. So is the multi-thread process faster than a single thread? It might be a question from your side. A multi-threaded program always has more work to do than a single threaded one. And computing the same result, it also has to do some extra work to coordinate multi-threads. A multi-threaded program can still finish faster than a sequenced one, of course, because some of the work is done on the proceed simultaneously. So at the same time, it can be finished much faster. Of course, then the program who is using the multi-threading need to be supported. So in the next slides, I give you an overview how it looks like in our Office software solutions. When we are starting with TBC, so I will list the next few seconds the features which all supporting the multi-thread operation on the machine. So for this TBC, it's a quite long list starting from the top. It's like the import and the export functions that we have. Then looking for the point cloud processing, like creating sample scans. It's also using the multi-thread operation. Plane-based registration that we are using in TBC is also supporting this. On the other hand side, also the refinement that we are using in TBC coming from RealWorks. So refinement all means for the TCF files or from the point cloud that we are putting together and just together. And on the other hand side, also the classification. So if you're doing a classification from your point cloud, either you want to extract buildings, grounds, high vegetation, poles and signs, or power lines. So these classification process in TBC is using the multi-thread processing. And the last 2 points are the panorama processing. So if you are having a data set from a SX10, for example, if you have captured the images along with point clouds, so these panoramas can be processed as well with the multi-thread operation. The last point would be the colorization of scans, which is also supporting the multi-thread operation in that case. In all other operations are using the single thread. Good. Then looking to RealWorks, how it looks in RealWorks. So what are the operations there that supporting the multi-thread operation? Again, import and export, as well as we have seen in TBC, also creating sample scans, supporting this kind of operation. The plane-based registration, as I was mentioned before in TBC, it's also supporting multi-thread for RealWorks, and the refinement for all the either the TCF files or the point clouds is supporting the operation and the classification as well. here's the refinement using scans. And the classification for wheelworks, we have the outdoor classification, as you might know, where we're listing the ground, building, poles and signs, power lines, high vegetations, and remaining. And the indoor classification, it's also available in wheelworks for the floor, the graded floor, ceiling, and the walls. And all other operations are using the single thread. Then having a look on the Trimble Perspective, here we don't have that many operations using multi-thread. The reason is it's more or less the field software solution that we are using in the field, but actually it's running on the Windows operation version or system, let's say. So starting with the refinement of a project is supporting the multi-thread operation, colorization of the point cloud by using the images, and also creating high quality panoramas by using the images are also supported by the multi-thread operation. And again, all other operations which can be used with the Trimble Perspective is using the single thread operation. Yeah, I hope this was actually well for you, giving an overview about the single and the multi-thread. Now let's talk about the important parameters, what we have inside a system or a computer. So starting with the CPU, as you might know, CPU, we also call it a central processing unit. It's an electronical part within the computer that makes the where you actually process the programs. The CPU performs basically algorithm controlling an in and output for operations in a specific way. Then we have the hard drive, the solid state drive. A few words about this one in a few minutes. There's also quite a difference in the market available that I want to show you in a few seconds. The solid drive, we have the capability to have fast access to the data, read and write the data from the hard drive. So it's also useful for the programs to get fast access to the solid drive. And most of the computers nowadays having a solid drive embedded. Then we have the random access memory, the RAM, for the computer memory. That's also quite important part from the system. And the last part is, of course, the graphic card processing unit, the CPU. That actually give you the visibility and show the data on your screen without having any lack of visibility. So graphic card is coming quite important nowadays if we are talking about large data set. Balance and speed. We need to understand how the communication between the different parts. In that case, we have 4 parts are working together. So let's start with the CPU. So it's communicating with the hard drive with our solid state. And on the other hand side, we have the RAM, which is communicating with the SSD as well, and vice versa. And in addition to the RAM, it's also communicating with the CPU as well. On the left-hand side, you see here on the slide. And from the RAM, it's also we also communicating with the graphic card with the CPU. And the key message here that I want to bring to you guys is it's not so important having large size of the components, means large cores or whatever, to provide the best speed. It is more important to have all the 4 operations, the areas here, the CPU, SSD, CPU, and the RAM working together on the same performance levels, and of course avoiding weak operations area. That means, with other words, remove bottlenecks. For example, if you have a strong CPU and large RAM and a very good CPU, but the solid hard drive is weak or it's not that fast that you can read and write the data, the whole performance is going down, and you see that processing time is increasing quite a lot. So only if we have all the 4 parts in a kind of good balance working together, then the processing time will be efficient also for the customers, and it's not getting annoying from the customer to waiting to get certain process finalized if you want to finalize certain things in the Office software. So this key message I want to send over to you, that it's not so important having large sizes for each component. It's more important to avoid weak operations area in that case. So having a good balance and speed is the quite important message here. And probably you also want to have some recommendations from our side, which is understandable. Of course, we can't really test all available parts which are available in the market, but the next few slides hopefully give you a better understanding what might be a good starting point to recommend to your customer, and also get an understanding what are the difference between these parts, and hopefully give you more comfortable with the customers if you have another call with them and saying, hey, why the processing time takes so long. And it would be good to check with them the system parameters, what they're using, and advise them in certain areas to improve the processing time. Starting with the CPU, so fast CPU, of course, is the key message here. So look at all core. Turbo speed is not only for a single core. So from our side, we are recommending stick with 8 cores or 16 threads. More or less go with a gaming CPU. And of course, the most important one, if you have large data set, is cooling down the CPU. It's also important not to get the CPU overheat under a certain time with the processing. And on the recommendation side, for example, as you might know, there are different brands available. We picked up 2 the major ones. First of all, the Intel. So in that case, we selected the Intel 9900K with 8 cores and 16 threads. So K is a quite good indication, which actually stands for a good CPU on the Intel side. It's also supporting the overclock, which means fast CPU processing. And the threads which are available is also quite good on the Intel processor over here. On the other hand side, we have the AMD, of course, on the market. Some of the customers are using AMD as well. So if you have customers using AMD, so the recommendation from our side would be using either the 3900X version with 12 cores and 24 threads, or the other version, the 3800X with 8 cores and 16 threads. And again, the key message here is the CPU speed is preferred over the core count. So it's not so important having million of cores available. It's more like having a good balance between cores and threads available. Then looking about the RAM, drive, and the CPU recommendations from our side. So starting with the RAM. So in that case, you should use 64 GB if possible, fast RAM. On the SSD side, as maybe not all of you know that on the SSD side, there are also different available on the market. So we have the SAT SSD, and we have this NVMe SSD, which is much faster than the SAT SSD. Excuse me. So in that case, you should use the NVMe SSD. It's host controller interface and storage protocol created by the accelerate the transfer of the data between the enterprise and the client system, and the solid state drive over computer high speed PC bus is actually the explanation of the NVMe. And this one I found on the web is a NVMe SSD faster than a SAT SSD. The answer is quite simple. Yes, it is. So the NVMe can queue more data at once to having access to more the PCIe LANs. So if you compare it with a highway, you have actually more lanes where the cars are driving to processing the data with the NVMe SSD compared to the general as a SAT SSD. So if possible, go with that. That will boost the performance for our Office software quite well. And if you would like to have more information on that, go to that link here to look it up. And when we look to the RAM, we also have some recommendations for you. You can start with the AMD, with the DDR4 3600. For Intel, you can also start with DDR4 as fast as possible. That's the key message over here. I was looking up the price, for example, for the Intel, which coming like 64 gigabyte from Samsung. It's around 370 euros, around about 420 US dollars. And when we're looking about the hard drive, the SSD, you can also use the Rapid Zero on the working drive, which comes with the Intel Rapid Storage technology, which is quite powerful. And what I was mentioning before, the NVMe, which have quite fast storage processing time, about 3,000 megabytes per second, and the SAT coming with 500. This was quite surprising for me. So that's what I learned from that information from our testing group. So we should not go with a SAT SSD drive, more like an NVMe drive if possible, of course. And I was also looking up the SSD hard drive, for example, for Samsung 970 Pro, having 2 terabyte of space, which costs around 350 euros or around about 400 US dollars. So that's a quite good, good price for that. And there might be also a question coming up, or I have, let's say, the question to myself, if it's important to install the Office software on the SSD hard drive as well, or should we install the software itself on an external drive to having a better performance? The answer is no. You should actually install the Office software on the SSD hard drive, because some of the components what we are using, for example, for ViewWorks, it's also storing or processing the data on the SSD part. For example, for ViewWorks, we are creating a kind of temp folder in the background for certain processes. And for that reason, it's important also to have the Office software installed on the SSD side, not stored or installed on the server or external drive. So stick with that. Install the Office software always on the SSD side as well. On the graphic card, we also have some recommendations to you. You can start with the AMD 5500 version or with the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 2060. When we're looking up, or I was looking up the price for the NVIDIA, which coming with I think 6 gigabyte of virtual RAM, which costs around 350 euros, so around about $400. With the graphic card, also important here to mention is the virtual RAM as well. So if possible, you should always go with a quite high virtual RAM if available. So not only stick with 1 GB, so starting with 4 GB or higher. It's our recommendation for the virtual RAM on the graphic card side. Yeah, that's leads me to the key takeaways that I want to put together to you guys, more or less, is the key messages for the presentation today was avoiding workstations and more or less go gaming on the system side, and also on the CPU speed. It's not so important having more cores available. It's more or less having the good balance in speed between the components working together. And if possible, using a NVMe SSD hard drive or Rapid Zero, if possible, to really get the performance increased on the system side. And you don't need to have an expensive graphic card available for the customers. So these recommendations that I was bringing up slides before are quite good examples that it doesn't need to be expensive all the time. And if you are putting all together, so this was a hint from our testing group. They figured out that it can be round about 5K US dollars as a budget, around about 4,500 euros for a system that's having a good performance and systems recommendations from our side. And I guess that's quite acceptable for customers who are working with large data sets and would like to have a good processing time in the end. Yeah, that's it more or less from my side. One more comment, just if questions coming up, please write it down in the chat window. We can have it in a few seconds, but there might be a question already in mind. If customers are using AMD processors by using TBC, as you might know, or you can also check it up or have a look in the release notes for TBC 530, as we are listing that the AMD Horizon processor are not supported at the moment for TBC 530, but the engineering team is aware of that, and they are working to get these kind of CPU types supported for TBC as a side note, as you might know already. Yeah, are there any questions? Ronald, do you see anything?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions. I think some of them came in early and you addressed that a little bit later. But good. Maybe just a couple one, maybe it's slightly repeating, but also, for instance, the i7 or i9 processor, is it more important to make a selection between these two, or is, for instance, the megahertz more important?
Yeah, as a recommendation, I was showing in the previous slides for TBC reworks and Perspective. Yeah, 2.8 gigahertz of processing time is good. It's a kind of high-level recommendation that we are using. Yeah, so again, just a repeat from my side. If you have these kind of processor available, that's fine. But again, if you have other parts which are quite weak, for example, the solid state, then it doesn't really matter if you have a 2.7 or 2.4 gigahertz core available. So if one of the 4 parts are weak, the whole performance speed is going down dramatically. So really having the full image in mind, having a good balance between 4 parts are the key message here. So you can go with that, of course, but it's not really that I would say that's strongly recommended, but you can go with that here.
Yeah, and related to that, I guess, to this, Do you know the effects if you would use an external fast SSD drive using a USB 3.1 connection to store and work on the data?
Not really. I haven't really much experience with that, but I can reach out to the testing group if they have any experience with the external SSD drive. If this helps, let's say, and we have the contact name from the guy who was asking this question.
Yes.
Okay, so we can I can check with them. If there's anything available that we have tested on our side, we can definitely share it with you. Sure.
Mm-hmm. And at some point you mentioned that you were talking about the graphics cards, and there was a question about did you mean GTX 1060 or RTX 2060?
Let's go. I was actually following this just system requirements over here. Was this on the TBC side? Oh, it was more like,
I think it was a little bit later.
Recommendations. The recommendations. Yeah. So we're going over here. CPU. Sorry for that. This is then over here. Can you just repeat, Ronald, the question?
Well, they were wondering whether you meant the RTX 2060 or the GTX 1060. They say like GTX 2060 does not exist, although
yes. I was checking this up as well. So what I mean with the NVIDIA, the last point on the slide over here is the GeForce RTX 2060, which is available, and I was looking this up. Yeah, there was still a typing error. I will correct this on my slide over here. Good point. Yeah.
And then a last question here as well is on you were mentioning go for gaming, right? But what about a gaming laptop versus a gaming desktop computer?
Well, also of course, what's available, the gaming pieces, what's available on the markets are really focusing on the processing time, that the parts are working together nice and smoothly, and having a good balance between having now a tower available, or let's say a PC compared to a laptop. Yeah, of course, if you're going gaming, then it's not really worth. It's not really a bad idea going with these systems, but also you have to keep in mind what's the budget available for the customer, because these kind of systems might be a bit expensive.
More expensive. I guess it's should you go for laptop or desktop? I guess that's the question there.
Okay. I don't have really much compare. Let's say as the laptop, it's more, let's say, you can actually use it quite handy if you're going if you travel around, compared to a laptop that it's mainly hosted in your office. But yeah, that's pro and cons available for both systems types, of course. I don't really want to say that one of the systems are better than the other one. So that's not really a clear answer from my side.
I guess at the end it comes down to the specs inside anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, correct.
All right. I think with that we went through all the key questions.
Perfect.
Yeah. There's one last coming in there. Are there settings in TBC that can harm the configuration?
Oh, say again, Ronald.
Are there settings in TBC that can harm the configuration?
There are a few settings, as I had in mind, under options, where you can actually change a few things, especially on the graphic card side. Of course, if you're not having the right settings setting up, then it can be having an impact. Of course, as well as on the rework side, as as I know that most of the systems are using 2 graphic cards, like an Intel one that's not so powerful. And on the other hand side, we have a quite powerful one, like a NVIDIA graphic card. And in that case, if you're using this Intel one with very low performance, that can actually having a huge impact of the performances on the display if you are processing or playing around with your data set to visualize. So the same on the TBC side as well. So yeah, there are a few things that you have to keep in mind on the graphic card as an example. But yeah, in the end, it also comes up if the whole 4 parts are working together nice and smoothly.
Yeah, but in TBC, for instance, you have a setting, and when you work with point clouds, right, you have a setting there that's where you can state how much memory is available for working with point clouds.
Correct. Yes,
and
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maximum that TBC allows you to set there is half of your RAM.
Half, correct. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but make sure that you utilize that if you work a lot with point clouds.
Correct.
Is 64 gigabyte of RAM with 2660 hertz okay?
Sounds quite good for me. It's a quite good specification. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think that that was it then with all the questions.
Perfect.
Thanks again, Stephen, for a very, very informative webinar. If later questions come up, you can always reach out to us, and we'll get back to you, of course.
Of course, yeah. Thanks a lot, guys, and having a good day to all of you.